Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
Mom said your sister's wedding was perfect. When's yours? I replied, had mine. You were busy that weekend. The bridal shower was held at Aunt Patricia's house, which meant the good china came out. The finger sandwiches were cut into triangles, and every woman in my family spent the first 40 minutes pretending to be someone slightly more refined than she actually was. I had driven 2 hours to be there. Not because I wanted to, I want to be honest about that from the beginning. I went because my cousin Danielle had always been kind to me in the specific, quiet way that people are kind when they've watched someone get treated badly for years and haven't known what to say. She deserved to have me in that room. So I went. I wore a pale blue dress. I brought a gift from the registry wrapped neatly, card handwritten. I smiled at the women who smiled at me. I accepted a glass of sparkling water and stood near the window where the hydrangea centerpiece blocked me from my mother's direct sight line. For 43 minutes it worked. Then Danielle opened a gift, a set of monogrammed hand towels from my Aunt Linda, and my mother, who had been waiting for precisely this kind of sentimental threshold, pressed her hand to her chest and sighed the way she did when she wanted the room to turn toward her. Danielle, she said loudly enough for the 12 women present to hear, your wedding is going to be the most beautiful day. I still cry when I think about your cousin Melissa's. She paused. She looked at me. That was the happiest day of my life. Watching Melissa walk down that aisle. Melissa is my sister. She got married 6 years ago in a ceremony that cost my parents $34,000 and lasted 8 hours and involved a string quartet, a custom cake, and a photo booth shaped like a vintage telephone booth. I know these details because my mother has repeated them to me at every significant family gathering since. When's yours? My mother asked. She said it lightly. She always said it lightly. That was the part people who weren't in my family never understood. The lightness. As if she were asking whether I'd tried the new restaurant downtown. As if it weren't a question she had been sharpening for years. 12 heads turned toward me. Aunt Linda, who had been refilling her mimosa, paused mid-pour to add, if it ever happens. She laughed. It was the laugh of someone who considers herself supportive. I set my sparkling water down on the windowsill. I looked at my mother. I looked at Aunt Linda. And then I said very quietly, without drama, without any preparation, because I had actually not planned for this to happen today at all. Had mine 4 years ago. The silence in that room was a specific kind of silence. Not the silence of shock exactly. More the silence of a room recalibrating. Of 12 women trying to simultaneously process whether they had heard correctly and what the correct facial expression was for having heard it. My mother was the first to find her voice. That's not funny, she said. I'm not joking. You've never been married. I have actually. We would have known. Her voice had taken on the particular flat tone she used when she was about to escalate but hadn't decided how far. You cannot get married without your family knowing, Nora. You can, I said. It turns out it's quite straightforward. You apply for a license, you choose a venue, you send invitations to the people you want there. My mother stood up. She was wearing her coral blazer, the one she wore to events she considered important, and her face had gone a particular shade that I recognized. Not quite red. Something underneath red. That is a lie, she said. I reached into my bag and took out my phone. I had 2,847 photos in the album labeled simply June 14th. I opened to the first gallery image. The wide shot of the venue, the white chairs arranged in rows, the afternoon light coming through the tall windows of the converted textile mill where we'd held the ceremony. Then I handed the phone to Danielle. She was the safest person in the room to hand it to. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. Her expression did something complicated. Nora, she said softly. Keep scrolling, I said. She scrolled. Around the room, heads began to crane. My mother sat back down. Not the way people sit when they've decided to sit. The way a person sits when their legs have made the decision independently. She said nothing for a very long time. I should tell you who I am before I tell you how I got here. Because context matters, and because the version of me sitting in that bridal shower with the pale blue dress and the calm voice was not the version of me who grew up in that family, and that distance is the entire story. My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 36 years old. I'm a structural engineer with a specialty in historic preservation, meaning I spend most of my professional life figuring out how to save buildings that other people have given up on. I've worked on 14 landmark projects across 9 states. 3 of them have been written about in architectural journals. One of them, a 1920s textile mill in western Massachusetts, was named a National Historic Landmark while I was the lead engineer on its renovation. That mill is where I got married. I grew up the second daughter in a family that had very specific ideas about what its daughters were supposed to do and be, and those ideas had been quietly, persistently applied to Melissa and me from the time we were old enough to understand that we were being compared. Melissa was beautiful in the way my mother understood beauty. Soft, compliant, oriented toward approval. She was also kind, which I want to say clearly because this is not a story about Melissa. She didn't choose the dynamic any more than I did. She just fit into it more naturally and I didn't, and that gap became the organizing principle of my childhood. I was the difficult one. The one who argued. The one who had opinions that didn't wait their turn. The one who wanted to study engineering when my mother thought I should study communications, who wanted to move across state lines when my mother thought I should stay within driving distance, who forgot to perform gratitude in the specific, visible ways that made my mother feel she was a good mother. I left for college at 18 and never fully came back. Not in the way that counts. My address changed 4 times. My career took me to Boston, then Chicago, then back to the Northeast for a project that turned into a decade-long specialty. I came home for holidays when I could tolerate it and skipped the ones when I couldn't, and every time I showed up, my mother had updated her list of the ways in which I was failing. The wedding question started after Melissa got married. Before that, it had been the career question. When are you going to get a real job, something stable, something you can do from here? And before that, the apartment question, and before that, the major question. There was always a question. The wedding question was just the current iteration. I understood this. It didn't make sitting through it easier. I met Daniel at a project site in the fall of 8 years ago. He was the architectural historian brought in to document the original structural drawings of a mill complex we were working to rehabilitate. He had the particular combination of qualities I had stopped expecting to find in a person. He was genuinely intelligent, completely uninterested in performing that intelligence, and constitutionally incapable of cruelty. I noticed the last quality first. It stood out. We had coffee on site. Then dinner off site. Then a longer conversation that lasted until 2 a.m. and covered, among other things, his theory that most buildings fail not from structural weakness but from human indifference. That what saves a building is someone who refuses to stop caring about it. I told him I'd thought the same thing and never heard it said out loud before. He looked at me like that was an interesting coincidence, which it was. We were together for 2 years before he met anyone in my family. Not because I was hiding him, I'd mentioned him casually in phone calls, but because I had learned by then that bringing someone I cared about into my family's orbit had a specific cost. My mother had a way of interrogating people I loved that she framed as interest and that functioned as assessment. I wasn't ready to let her assess Daniel. The first time I brought him home for Thanksgiving, she asked him within 20 minutes what his salary range was, whether his field had good job security, and whether he'd thought about transitioning to something more corporate. He answered her pleasantly and later in the car said, "She's trying to figure out if you'll need to support me." I said yes. He said, "And she thinks that would be a problem." I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She doesn't know you very well." He proposed on the job site where we'd met. It was a Saturday in October, the building half restored around us, sawdust on the floor and the smell of old wood and plaster in the air. And he got down on one knee on the rough concrete and said he wanted to marry me in this building specifically because it was where he'd learned what I was made of. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We planned the wedding together over the following 8 months. We wanted 200 people, not family or not mostly family. Friends, colleagues, people from the industry we'd worked alongside, a few former professors, the crew from 3 different job sites who had become something closer than co-workers. We wanted the textile mill, which by then had been fully restored and was operating as an event venue, and which I had in a small way helped save. The owner gave us the space as a wedding gift and refused to hear otherwise. The question of my family came up exactly once. I sat with it for a long time. I thought about what it would mean to have my mother in that room, the way she would position herself at the reception, the comments she would make about the venue, the questions she would ask Daniel's family, the way she would inevitably find a way to make the day about the gap between what I'd done and what Melissa had done, and how even in the moment I was supposed to be most present, I would be managing her. I thought about standing at the altar and looking out at 200 faces and needing to locate hers and brace for whatever expression she decided to wear. And then I thought about the version of the day without that. Clean. Full of people who had chosen to be in my life without obligation. Full of friends who knew me without comparison. I thought about what it would feel like to walk into that room and feel nothing but the thing I was actually there to feel. I sent the invitations. All of them. My parents arrived by certified mail, signature required, on a Tuesday morning in March. The delivery record shows it was signed for at 10:42 a.m. That weekend, my parents were at their lake house for a friend's anniversary trip. I had checked the calendar. I had verified the dates. I had known, when I addressed the envelope, that there was a meaningful chance they would not see it until they returned, and that if they chose not to reschedule, that would be its own kind of answer. They did not reschedule. June 14th came on a Saturday. The mill was full of afternoon light. My best friend Maya walked me down the aisle because I had asked her to, and she had cried when I asked. Daniel waited at the altar in a gray suit, and when I appeared in the doorway he pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they're trying not to cry in public. We were married by a judge who had known Daniel's family for 30 years. The reception went until midnight. My parents called on Sunday afternoon. I didn't answer. We moved into our house, a 1940s brick colonial that needed exactly the kind of attention I was professionally qualified to give it, the following spring. Daniel's office is in Boston, an hour away. He makes the commute 3 days a week and works from the house the other 2. Our daughter, Ren, was born 2.5 years after the wedding, in the bedroom at the top of the stairs, because I had always wanted a home birth and Daniel had agreed after approximately 45 minutes of conversation and zero debate. Ren is 18 months old now. She has Daniel's eyes and my stubbornness and an absolute commitment to narrating everything she sees, which her pediatrician calls developmentally advanced and which Daniel calls inevitable. My mother does not know she exists. This requires explanation because I've been asked, by friends, by my therapist, by Daniel's mother who has a kind face and asks hard questions, whether this is something I've chosen or something that happened to me. The honest answer is that it's both. I didn't make a single decision to exclude my mother from my life. I made a series of smaller decisions, each of which felt survivable, that accumulated into a distance too large to cross without someone acknowledging it. And my mother had never, in 36 years, been the one to acknowledge the distance between us. That had always been my job. After the wedding, there had been a confrontation. Not at the bridal shower, a different one earlier when my mother found out through a mutual family connection that Daniel and I had married. She had called, and when I answered she said, "I heard you got married. In secret. Like you were ashamed of us." I had said, "Not ashamed. Protective." She had said, "Of what?" I had said, "Of myself." She'd hung up. We hadn't spoken for 14 months after that. When we began speaking again, it was carefully. Phone calls, not visits. Brief, curated. I talked about work. She talked about Melissa's children. Neither of us said Daniel's name. The lake house trip, the missed invitation, the ceremony she hadn't attended, none of it was discussed. My mother had decided, it seemed, that the safest way to manage what had happened was to behave as though it hadn't happened entirely, and as long as I didn't force the issue, we could maintain a functional surface. Ren's existence was part of what I was protecting by maintaining that surface. Not forever. I knew, in some vague future tense way, that the day would come when I would have to decide what my daughter's relationship to my family would look like, and I hadn't decided yet, and until I did, the surface held. The bridal shower broke it. Back in that room, among the hydrangeas and the triangle sandwiches and the 12 women who were no longer pretending to be more refined than they were, my mother looked at Danielle's hands, still holding my phone, still scrolling, and said in a voice I had never heard from her before, "How many people were there?" 200, I said. From where? Work. Friends. Daniel's family. People who knew us. I paused. Not people who were required to know us. Aunt Linda had put down her mimosa. She was watching my mother with the careful attention of someone who understood they were witnessing something they would be describing later. "You sent invitations," my mother said. It wasn't quite a question. I did. "We never received them. You signed for yours. Tuesday, March 8th, 10:42 in the morning. I have the delivery confirmation." My mother's hands, folded in her lap, pressed together more tightly. We were at the lake, she said. I know. I checked your calendar first. The room was very still. Danielle had stopped scrolling. She held my phone in both hands and looked at it, then at me with an expression that was equal parts sorrow and something like awe. I don't understand, my mother said quietly now, the performance gone out of her voice. Why would you do this? Why would you get married without us? I thought about all the things I could say. I had imagined this conversation in various forms for 4 years. In some versions I said everything. The full accounting, the weight of every holiday dinner, every when's yours, every comparison to Melissa that had arrived gift-wrapped in concern. In other versions I said very little because some things cannot be compressed into a sentence without becoming something they aren't. I chose something in between. Because, I said, I wanted one day that was only mine. One day that wasn't about what I hadn't done yet or what Melissa had done better, or what you thought I was missing. I wanted to get married in a room full of people who saw me as I actually am, not as the version of me that's always falling short. I stopped. So I did. My mother opened her mouth. Closed it. The invitations were sent, I continued. You were given the opportunity to rearrange your schedule. The date was a Saturday. The lake trip was optional. I wasn't saying this to wound her or not only. I was saying it because it was true and I was tired of the truth being treated as aggressive. I didn't exclude you. You were just lower on the priority list than the lake house and I decided to respect that. Aunt Linda made a small sound that might have been a laugh and immediately converted it into a cough. My mother looked at me for a long moment. She looked older than she had when the shower started. I noticed the gray at her temples that she usually had colored showing through and I thought about what it means to really see someone, to stop looking at who you need them to be and look at who they actually are. She was a woman who had built her identity around her family and had missed her daughter's wedding because she'd been at a lake house. And now she was sitting in her sister's house learning that the daughter she'd compared unfavorably to the other daughter had been married for 4 years to someone she'd never met and had a grandchild she didn't know existed. I hadn't planned to tell her about Ren today. But she looked at me with something that wasn't quite sorrow and wasn't quite fury, something somewhere underneath both, and she said, Is there more I don't know? I considered that question carefully. Yes, I said. We stepped outside together. Just the two of us on the back patio, the bridal shower carrying on in muffled tones through the screen door. My mother sat in one of Aunt Patricia's white garden chairs and I stood near the railing, and I told her about Ren. I watched my mother's face do something I had not seen it do in many years. Maybe ever. The performance dropped entirely, not replaced by another performance but genuinely gone. She put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. She didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then she said, What's her name? Ren. She made a small involuntary sound. She has Daniel's eyes, I said, and my mother flinched slightly at Daniel's name because she still didn't know him, had never met him, and here was his name attached to her granddaughter's eyes. She's 18 months. She's loud and opinionated and she already knows what she wants. My mother laughed, which surprised both of us. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her. She sounds like you, she said. Yes, I said. She does. We were quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was dropping, going gold the way it does in late spring, and somewhere in Aunt Patricia's yard a bird was making an argument with another bird about something. I don't know how to fix this, my mother said. And I heard in her voice that she meant it, not as a performance of humility, but as a genuine statement of lostness. She was a woman who had always known what to do next, who had moved through her life with the confidence of someone who believed her coordinates were correct. And she was sitting in a garden chair realizing her coordinates had been wrong for a very long time. I don't know either, I said. This was also true. I had not arrived at this bridal shower expecting to have this conversation. I had not come prepared with a plan for what happened after the revelation, the way I usually prepared for difficult situations. The way I had prepared, for instance, for the confrontation 4 years ago after the wedding. I had just said a true thing and the true thing had opened a door I didn't fully know what was behind. Could I meet them? She asked. Daniel. And Ren. I was quiet for a moment. I don't know, I said. That's not a decision I can make alone. She nodded. Of course. She pressed her hands flat on her knees, a gesture I recognized from my own body, something I did when I was grounding myself. Of course it isn't. We sat with that for another minute. Inside someone laughed. Danielle's laughter specifically, she had a distinctive laugh, clear and sudden. She deserves a good wedding, my mother said, and I understood she was talking about Danielle, steering herself back onto navigable ground. She does, I said. She's marrying someone who loves her well. It was obvious from the moment she introduced him. My mother looked at me. You noticed that? I always notice that. Another pause. I noticed it about you and Daniel, she said tentatively, as though she were stepping onto ice she wasn't sure would hold. The one time I met him. Thanksgiving. You asked him about his salary within 20 minutes. I know. She looked away. I was frightened of him. This surprised me. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because you looked at him the way I hadn't seen you look at anything connected to us in a very long time. Like he was yours. Like you'd built something and it was working. She paused. And I didn't know how to be part of something you'd built without me. I stood at the railing and absorbed this. Outside of therapy, in 14 years of adult life, my mother had not said anything to me that came close to that honest. I didn't know what to do with it except to not dismiss it. That might be the truest thing you've ever said to me, I said. She looked at her hands. Probably. It doesn't fix anything. I know. But it's a starting place, I said. If you want one. A real one, not the surface we've been maintaining. She looked up. I want one. Then it'll take time, I said. And it'll require you to meet Daniel on his terms, not yours. And to understand that Ren's life, her rhythms, her world, those belong to Daniel and me, and you'll be invited into them at a pace we decide. My mother swallowed. For a woman who had spent her life holding the center of every family arrangement, this was not a small thing to accept. All right, she said. I drove home that evening through the long light of early summer, the windows down, the radio on something wordless. I called Daniel when I was 20 minutes out, and he answered on the second ring with the particular hello he used when he already knew something had happened. Lower, more present. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the many things I loved about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know yet, I said. Strange. Like something shifted that I didn't expect to shift today. Do you want her to meet Ren? I think I might, I said. Eventually. I don't know if that's wise or just human. Probably both, he said. Yeah. I heard Ren in the background, her particular pre-dinner commentary, a running monologue about something just out of my earshot. She's telling me about a leaf, Daniel said. Very detailed account. I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes up from somewhere honest. I'll be home in 20 minutes. We'll be here, he said. I drove the last stretch with the windows still down, the air smelling like cut grass in early summer, and I thought about the textile mill, about all the buildings I had learned to look at and ask, what's worth saving here and what do we let go and where's the line between the two? It was never a clean answer. It was always a negotiation between what was structurally sound and what was too far gone, and it required you to know the difference even when the difference was hard to see. I didn't know yet where my mother and I fell on that spectrum. I suspected we were somewhere in the middle, not beyond repair but requiring work that neither of us had done before, and tools we didn't fully have yet, and a willingness to be surprised by what turned out to be load-bearing. What I knew was this: my life was built. My house, my husband, my daughter, my work. These were real and solid and mine, not in spite of what my family had withheld but alongside it. The wedding had happened without them and it had been exactly what I wanted. The 4 years since had been exactly what I wanted. I had not needed my mother's witness to make any of it real. But I was still her daughter. And she was still, somewhere underneath the performance and the competition and the 36 years of getting it wrong, trying to figure out how to love me in a language she'd never been taught. Whether that was enough to build something on, that was still a question. I turned into my driveway. The house was lit from inside, warm and particular, the windows casting their familiar shapes onto the front lawn. Daniel's car was in its spot. Through the kitchen window I could see movement. Him at the counter, Ren in her chair, the ordinary miracle of a Tuesday evening that was mine. I sat in the car for one moment before going in. My phone buzzed. A text from Danielle, Nora. I had no idea. I'm so glad you were there today. I love you. I typed back, I love you too. Congratulations on your person. Then I got out of the car, walked up the path and opened my front door. Ren saw me first. She always saw me first. Mama, she said with the full weight of that word and held up the leaf she'd been telling Daniel about. A large, complicated maple leaf, autumn red at the edges though it was only May, which meant it had fallen early from somewhere, carried here by whatever small wind had decided she should have it. I see it, I said. I crouched down to her level. Tell me everything. She did.